Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. My name is Mariam Mukhtarzadeh. I am the Executive Director of NWMI, Next Wave Muslim Initiative. This evening we are going to begin our program with Quran recited by one of our NWMI volunteers and program manager, Haya Shah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. O you who believe, be maintainers of justice, bearers of witness of Allah's sake, though it may be against your own selves, or your parents or near relatives. If they be rich or poor, Allah is nearer to them both in compassion. Therefore do not follow your low desires lest you deviate. And if you swerve or turn aside, then surely Allah is aware of what you do.
Thank you, Haya. MashaAllah, this program, as you can see, reached capacity within 36 hours of our advertising. We have over 60 people who were on our waiting list. A few of them we were lucky to allow to join us here tonight. But it's clear from the interest and the response from our program that you value this topic as much as we do at NWMI. This time of year, many Muslims remember the life and sacrifice of Imam Hussein. As NWMI's program managers planned our Muharram events, we felt that in order to remember Imam Hussein's sacrifice meant we had to speak up against the social injustices that are happening around us today. The abuse of our black brothers and sisters has gone on far too long. And it is our responsibility to speak up against this systemic injustice and learn how we as American Muslims can be allies to the activists in the Black Lives Matter movement. In addition to this evening's program, tomorrow we also have a workshop geared for middle school and high school students so that they are equipped to tackle this issue coming from a Muslim perspective so that all of our community members can be fully aware and responsible for their responsibility as an ally. Thank you again for coming this evening. I'd like to introduce and welcome Tanaz Haddadi, our NWMI board president and the program manager for this evening, who also miraculously is going to come, inshallah, to the stage with a loud takbir and applause, inshallah.
Assalamualaikum, everyone. So now you'll never forget me, the girl who fell in front of 120 people. So welcome, everyone. Jazakallah khairan for coming. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say a few words before we started. We've been working on this program since August, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, happy tears, have gone into putting this program together. To us, we felt that it was really vital to get the right panelists, the right moderators, the right people on this panel, which is why we actually took the time and did this in a very deliberate way. I'm so excited that our esteemed panelists are here. We'll introduce them one by one to you. I want to take a moment before we do that, actually, to talk about a few things. One, before we start the actual program, we're going to be showing a very short documentary by Sabrina Gordon. It's a 7.5-minute documentary. It's been going around the internet, it's on Facebook, and probably many of you all have seen it. But what it does is it really creates a framework about what is Black Lives Matter, who are its founders, what was their intent, what does hashtag Black Lives Matter even mean, so that inshallah we can actually start this evening's conversation with the same foundation and understanding, and our panelists can take us even further than that. There are pens and index cards on your tables, as you will see. We will be having a moderated Q&A session after the panel is over. We've decided to do it this way for the sheer number of individuals that are here. So I'd like to ask actually a few of our NWMI volunteers to stand up. So can Haya and Akbar, if you guys could stand up, please, so people can see you. Marie, don't know if she's here. She's outside, okay. And a few other people will be here to collect your index cards. So if you have a question that you have, please raise them. They will be scanning the crowds throughout the panel. They will come and get the index cards from you, and we'll share that with our panel. We do apologize in advance. We will not be able to answer probably all of the questions. We'll do the best that we can to address all of them given the duration of the time we have and the number of individuals here, inshallah. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Safir Rub. I'm actually going to read his bio. I really think it's important for individuals to be presented in the way that they want to be presented, and I think that narrative is important. So forgive me if I'm reading a little bit from my phone because I want to make sure to get it right. Safir Rub II has long worked with members of the U.S. and international communities to represent and promote an effective interface between profitable business and corporate social responsibility. As CEO of Interculture Incorporated, he is a social entrepreneur, community developer, and high-level business advisor who leads a team of problem solvers and works that focuses at the intersection of community and international development. Safir maintains a strong commitment to social change and urban revitalization. He served as the Chief Operating Officer for I Can't, We Can, a celebrated community development and drug rehabilitation organization that has received over 100 awards and citations from state and local officials and peer organizations since its founding more than 15 years ago. He served as consultant to the Obama administration's transition team for public diplomacy, participates in the Brookings Institute's U.S. Islamic World Forum, is a senior advisor to the Dean of University of Southern California's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, is a member of the Pacific Council, and board member of Educate Girls Globally and Kanye West's Donda's House. Safir completed a 2-year program in Islamic law at Abu Noor Institute in Syria and is a Columbia University Rothschild Fellow for Interfaith Relations. He holds a BA from the University of Maryland and an MBA from Johns Hopkins University. Safir primarily resides in Baltimore and frequents the Middle East. Without further ado, if we can have the screen come down, please, so that we can show the documentary. And then I'm going to turn the panel over to Safir, who will introduce the other panelists and get the conversation going, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan.
I guess we don't get to see it. Y'all ready for this?
It went viral when we first created it, actually. In that moment, I think we knew that we were onto something that was resonating in a very deep way.
The hashtag is this phenomenon now.
Yeah. You want to go there?
People were tweeting us like, hey, didn't y'all create Black Lives Matter? And then all of a sudden, it's like the Black Lives Matter movement, and then none of us are actually there to tell the story of the Black Lives Matter.
The narrative has really evolved to this weird thing of, oh, you know, again, our black women are fighting for our black men. And it's like, wait a minute, what? No, we're fighting for all of us.
All right, let me just set the record straight.
My name is Opal Tamedi.
My name is Patrice Cullors.
I'm Alicia Garza.
We are the founders of hashtag Black Lives Matter.
I am born and raised in the Bay Area in California. There's not many of us left. We're almost like unicorns. I come from a long line of strong black women. My grandmother was a domestic worker. My mom did domestic work. A lot of my background in organizing comes from organizing with women.
I come to this work because I am the daughter of Nigerian immigrants who are actually undocumented for most of my childhood, possibly facing deportation. That to me really shaped my my entire kind of formative years.
I grew up in Los Angeles and witnessed a significant amount of state violence. I remember the police officer who would patrol our block and would harass my siblings. And I remember feeling frightened most of the time. So my coming into this work has to do with the fight for Black lives.
We have breaking news tonight in the case of the unarmed Black teenager shot dead by a crime
When
watch.
Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, this was a case where a child had literally been stalked and killed just steps away from home. The conversation that was happening in the media was, what did Trayvon do to cause his own death?
The reason Trayvon Martin died was because he looked a certain way. He was wearing a hoodie, and that way is how gangstas look.
Thinking about my 14-year-old brother and literally not being able to sleep because I was like, this cannot be.
When it was announced that the jury had acquitted George Zimmerman of all charges, it actually felt like I got punched in the gut. So I went on social media to try to find words for what was happening. And what I wanted in that moment was some love for us. And so I wrote a love letter to Black people on Facebook. And I said, Black people, I love you, I love us, we matter, our lives matter, Black lives matter. And my sister here threw a hashtag in front of it. She was like, that's the business right there. And then my sister Opal said, I have all these skills and I can help build this out. We need people to have a space to tell their stories. We need folks to have a space to collaborate together, to strategize together, so that we can build the power that we need in order to get free.
When we developed Black Lives Matter, it was never just about the killings of young Black boys. It was about an intervention and really declaring that all Black lives matter. Black immigrants, Black folks with disabilities, Black trans folks, bringing our team that are at the margins closer and closer for the purpose of building our power.
Black Lives Matter is about so much more than policing. Yes. And that's something that gets lost a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to bring together more folks than are just working in the criminal justice system.
Yes.
And we need to understand how police, right, are a part of the ability of these systems to thrive and function.
I believe that we're in an incredible time with social media. It's been integral to our movements. However, I don't think it's everything. Like, we can't sit and watch on Twitter or see the live streams and Facebook feeds and all that. We actually have to show up physically. We're kind of following in the same tradition as our elders and utilizing whatever means we have in order to get the message out.
Roll, Jordan, roll. Roll, Jordan, roll. I want to go to heaven when I die.
Lots of folks want to compare us to the civil rights movement. Our movement is not ahistorical. We come from a long legacy of resistance and resilience as Black people. But the old civil rights really upheld a narrative around respectability, around what we're supposed to look like and be like. Folks in Ferguson said, no, we're not your respectable Negro. We are going to sag our pants. We are going to be ratchet.
That's right.
And we're okay with that. We believe that we have to show up in our full selves without closeting parts of ourselves, marginalizing parts of ourselves, and build together.
You're going to hear it once. All lives matter. All lives matter.
Black lives matter. White lives matter. All lives matter.
All lives matter!
The reason that we don't use All Lives Matter is because that's obvious, but it's also a utopia that we don't live in. Part of the discomfort around talking about Black Lives Matter is that it breaks open a fundamental contradiction in this country, which is racism and white supremacy. In this next period where we have kind of the sunsetting of one presidency and the ascendancy of another one, we really need to be talking about this question of citizenship, which I think is huge. And I feel like what Black folks are fighting for in this moment, right, is what we've been fighting for the whole time, which isn't citizenship like papers,
Right.
but it's citizenship like dignity, like humanity,
And
right?
access.
And access, exactly. And making sure that people have the ability to shape and participate in a new type of democracy. Nobody wants to talk about race in a post-racial society. But this is a real deep-seated disease that this country suffers from that infects all of our society. And so when we nail this piece around Black lives, we're actually trying to unlock the humanity of this country.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Is it on? Assalamu alaikum. So we're going to have a good and lively discussion. My name is Safir Rab, as Tanaz mentioned, and I have the honor of moderating tonight's auspicious panel. I want to start off with a quick note about my father-in-law, who I think about during panels like this. My father-in-law, who fought in the Vietnam War and came back and joined the Nation of Islam. He worked as a security person, one of the security personnel for Muhammad Ali, and he traveled around frequently. Really, really incredible. He was an Army Ranger in the Vietnam War, and exactly 1 year ago, he was killed by police in Oklahoma. And it really brought this Black Lives Matter movement home. It kind of punctuates the reality that we are not disconnected, and even as many of us know people, and in some cases have family members who are directly affected by Black Lives Matter, or the fact that Black lives have been treated with short worth, which kind of debunks the idea that all lives matter. Because if a portion of lives aren't mattering in practice, then all lives can't matter if that portion isn't recognized. So the accent is focused on what seems to not matter in society. This panel will examine this issue and talk about it really from the perspective, from two really important perspectives. One, from the perspective of the 10th of Muharram and the martyr of Imam Hussein, which is an important event for the life of Muslims all over, everywhere. And some like to make this a Shia concern. This is not a Shia concern. This is a Muslim concern for all Muslims everywhere, and we ought to promote that. Mostly because the social justice of his life and its relevance to Muslims is demonstrated in a way that will get highlighted. So we're going to ask them to consider. The other part is these are scholars, professors, activists, and I want to introduce each one of them one by one. And then we're going to have, so they're going to talk each one 15 minutes apiece or so, give or take, and then we'll have, as Sister Tanaz mentioned, who we'd like to give a round of applause real quick. Sister Tanaz. She gives new meaning to the way one bus is there behind to put something together. But I'm glad she's okay, and she's really like a blood sister to me. I've known her for most of my life, and I was delighted to stop whatever I was doing when she had a cancellation and come and fill in for this. So I'm gonna introduce each one by one, and then but get your questions together so we can hopefully spark a good dialogue as well. First up, we have the professor. Professor Dr. soon to be, Donna Austin, is an anthropology doctoral candidate at Rutgers University, where she received her BA in Linguistics and Africana Studies and instructs in a variety of courses in the anthropology department at Rutgers. Her interests include race, ethnicity, media representation, and Islam in America. She has been researching and writing about American Muslim history for nearly 2 decades, particularly on the African American Muslim community. She's published book chapters on the historic legacy of African American Islam and its relationship to the broader Black arts, culture, and protest. Additionally, she has a forthcoming book chapters in a broader anthology that includes works at the intersections between Islamophobia, Black Lives Matter, and a study of the Nation of Islam's religious transition in the aftermath of Elijah Muhammad's passing in 1975. Without further ado, Dr. Donna Austin.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, it's great to be here. Thank you to Tanaz and the team for extending the invite to me here. It's really an honor to be able to address you what is really a sacred season for us as Muslims. This is a time of the year when Tanaz asked me to come and to deliver some remarks. She wanted me to kind of make some connections here between the events that we remember at this time of the year and what's going on now. As I'm fond of saying that, these stories that we are taught in the Quran and the histories that come after that, they're not for our entertainment, they're for our edification, and we're supposed to take those stories of what happened in the past and see ourselves in those stories and figure out where it is we are supposed to be and what it is we're supposed to be doing now. Okay, so there's 2 things, right? As you all know, I'm not really going to go into all of the details because you all know the stories, right? You know the story of Imam Hussein's martyrdom. May Allah be pleased with him, right? You know the circumstances under which he was killed. We know that that he was facing the prospect of giving his allegiance to a government and to a ruler that was oppressive. And he could not live with that choice, right? And so it cost him his life. And so we remember, this is the ultimate sacrifice, right? When you, sacrifice is always gonna cost us something, right? And we should always remember that. And it may cost you the thing that's most dear to you, right? But it's intolerable. The Quran teaches us, right, that oppression is worse than slaughter. So it's important to remember that. It's also, I think, important to remember the story of Musa, and the children of Israel, that we learn in the Quran that that the bondage that they were subject to, and that the celebration and the fasting on the 10th of Muharram, right, for us is also about honoring Musa and the children and Allah delivering the children of Israel, right, from Pharaoh's bondage, right? And this is, for me as an African American, this is actually a point of extreme importance. I grew up as a Christian, and in African American Christianity, the story of Moses and the Israelites and the metaphor, right? We talked, as I said before, these stories are for our edification. Right? This is a story and this is a motif that has been deployed over and over again in our religious traditions, meaning the religious tradition that I grew up with, right? To speak to slavery. This shows up, you all, I'm gonna show of hands. Who knows Harriet Tubman? Right, we know Harriet Tubman. Does anybody know what one of her nicknames was? She was Moses of her people, right? This is a deep, this is a story with deep historical significance in this country, right? And it's connected, right? It's connected to what's going on now. Slavery is not 100,000 years ago, right? I I have a living relative who remembers her grandmother who was a slave, right? So it's not that long ago. And the things that we see now actually are a direct result of those things that happened then. So it's always important to kind of make these connections. You know, the motif of Pharaoh and Moses, right, also shows up in our music. It shows up in Negro spirituals. Go down, Moses, right? You know, tell Pharaoh to let my people go, right? So this is a time of the year where we have multiple reasons as Muslims to remember and reflect upon the importance of sacrifice in the face of oppression and taking a stand, which is going to cost. It's going to cost you some comfort. It may cost you your life. It may cost you your prejudices, right? Because we have within our own communities, right? We have prejudices, right, that prevent us from being the type of believers that we need to be in times like this. A lot of times I think we ask ourselves, we think about, excuse me, we think about when we're reflecting upon these stories, when we're thinking about what would I have done if I was alive during the time of Imam Hussein, right? Don't we, you know, we play these kind of, right, imagination games, right? What would I do? Which side would I be on? Well, the thing is, right, there's something happening right now. Which side are we on right now? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. Where are we now? Because there's always a moment, there's always an opportunity, there's always oppression, there's always something that we have to do. There's always a stand that we have to take no matter what time that we find ourselves living in historically. And we have to make sure that we are following those examples and that we are on the side of the right. Okay, so it's you know, so that's just an opening framework, you know, to think about this religiously, right? You know, and as a Muslim, right, as somebody who converted to Islam, for me personally and for many of the people I know who are African Americans and have made this transition, you know, a lot of the motivating factors, right, that drove and continues to drive African Americans into Islam is this commitment to social justice and this need to address the ongoing problem of racism in this country. And so the various movements of African, you know, within African American Islam, it's a very diverse tradition in and of itself, right? And I won't go into all of that, but most African American Islamic movements, right, have dealt with the question of racism as a central enduring concern in some way or another. And this has been a motivating and an organizing principle upon which these movements have been founded and continue to operate, right? So the question of what to do about white supremacy has never gone away for us and for the Muslims who are pioneers really in this land, who make it possible for all of us to stand here and be Muslim. This question of white supremacy and what to do about it, whether it shows up as police violence or whether it shows up as unclean drinking water in a place like Flint. In all of the different ways that it shows up, right? This is what Islam and this nation has been about. Okay, so just to transition a little bit, I just want to, so you saw the film, which gives you like a brief, you know, kind of overview of how what we now call the Black Lives Matter movement began. I just want to add to that, you know, in line with my previous comments, it's important to remember that although the hashtag, right, and the saying, the phrase, the slogan, and now an organization of activists called Black Lives Matter, right, has its origins in 2013, you know, after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. The issues that this movement addresses are old and enduring, and they predate this particular thing by centuries, right? Trayvon Martin's death wasn't something new. It wasn't something that we had never seen before. You know, many of us, I mean, I can tell stories. I mean, I've seen my neighbors beat by the cops. I lost a childhood friend from my neighborhood who was killed by police officers. He was just a teenager, and those police officers didn't pay. If you're familiar with the film Selma, has anybody seen Selma? You've watched that, right? You know the events on that, or you know the events of that movie. I mean, the police violence was present in that film, and those are real life events, right? So these issues, if you're familiar with American history, if you know about Baltimore. last year, right, erupted and, and unrest and over the death of Freddie Gray, right? And so it's interesting to me when the commentators get on the news and they always say, well, why would this happen? We've seen this before many times. And it's interesting because many of the same exact problems, right, are repeating themselves. When there was unrest in the 60s in Watts, when there was unrest in the 60s in Detroit, in Newark, all of these different places, right, the conditions of perpetual unemployment, poverty, deplorable living conditions, right, became this gasoline, right, on all of this paper, all of this fuel, right? And each of those, most of them, not all of them, but most of those incidents began, the spark was an incident of police brutality, right? So what we're dealing with is not new. And as a matter of fact, the very origins of organized policing in the U.S. go back to slave patrols. Do we know what slave patrols are? Slave patrols were crews of whites who were vigilantes dispatched to catch runaway slaves. And this is how policing gets started in the United States. So at the very root of police, period, in the U.S. is violence against black bodies. There is also complicity, even if it's not direct police action, there is a lot of complicity historically in lynchings, right, where police are looking the other way while black people are murdered in the most savage and brutal way and their bodies desecrated, right, over, supposedly looking a white woman in the eye or something really minor, right? These incidents of mob violence against black people that haven't, these things are all deeply apart. This is American history, and this is the American history that many of us don't hear about or we gloss over, we don't want to revisit, right? But when we ignore that fundamental organizing principle of America, right, which is white supremacy, we find ourselves in a situation where we as a community, as a Muslim community, which is diverse ethnically, racially, economically, along a number of indicators, right, we have huge segments of our community who don't feel like these issues are their problem. And that's an issue, right? Because if we're thinking about what it means to be the inheritors of Imam Hussein's legacy, if we're thinking about what it means to be the inheritors of Musa's legacy, right? If we're thinking about what it means to be Muslim in this time, we need to ask ourselves, which side are we on? Because history is happening, don't forget about history, right, that happened there. You're in this imaginary place that's not necessarily even real to a lot of us. Even though we know the stories, we remember them, we mourn, and we reflect, but it's not tangible, right? It's not tangible until you can bring it down to earth and figure out what it means and what it must mean for you in your life. Neutrality is complicity. You cannot be neutral, right? And be true to the principles of Islam or to the life and legacy of our people like Imam Hussein, right? Who made the ultimate sacrifice, right, for what they knew to be right. And if we are to call ourselves inheritors of that legacy, then we need to get our acts together. Inshallah.
Okay. All right. We're going to keep it moving. We next have Layla Abdul-Paulos, who is an adjunct faculty at SUNY Enterprise State College. Empire State College. Get it right. Sounds like a New York thing.
The New York thing.
All right, straighten me out. She holds an MA in Liberal Studies and an advanced certificate in Women and Gender Studies. Abdul-Paulos is the project manager for NBA Muslims, a cultural project highlighting the heritages, experiences, and cultural productions of native-born American Muslims of African American, Indigenous, Latin, and European descent. She also serves as a New York trainer for the Muslim Arc, which works on anti-racism as the Anti-Racism Coalition for Muslims, and is a U.S. correspondent for About Islam. Sister Layla.
Assalamu alaikum. You know, one of the things I was very, very nervous about when I was coming down here, well, way before then, and Tanaz, you actually eased my anxiety because I was under the impression after our phone call that was going to be Donna, Tariq, and then me. Because I was scared to death of following Donna. And now here I am, okay? So, mashallah. I want to talk about Muslim Arc, but before I talk about what Muslim Arc does, I'd like to talk about what Muslim Arc has done for me. I spent a lot of years learning about intersections of race and gender and religion, and I never fully connected them. And so when I experienced instances of bias, discrimination, and out-and-out racism, and inside and outside the Muslim community, I never really connected those dots together. And so one day I was on the internet and I saw Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. I was like, oh, let me check it out. And it was a space to connect those dots. Everything that I had been learning and everything that I experienced had, I relearned a way of looking at them and engaging them in them. And I felt very, very empowered by that. Because as a black Muslim in the United States, I'm a minority in my community. And I found myself a minority in many Muslim communities and experiencing that, which was very, very different than growing up and my father was Nation of Islam, so it was a very different experience inside the Nation of Islam, and then outside where you're a minority and you're very much treated as such. And I knew how to handle that as a black woman, but I didn't know how to handle that as a black Muslim woman. And that's what Muslim Arc did for me. So, and you saw those three women up there. It was like two dynamic women, Namiri Islam and Marguerite Aziz Hill, who started Muslim Arc. So following the tradition of empowerment of all people through women, they're following that tradition as well. So I want to talk a little bit about what Muslim Arc does. I have it written down because they do so many great things. I didn't want to miss anything. Okay, so while Muslim Arc is not officially part of Black Lives Matter, or does it have a formal relationship with any of the local chapters, we've called for greater engagement from Muslim American community to support the Black Lives Matter movement by providing trainings and education resources to facilitate coalition building and actions of solidarity. Outside of the Muslim communities and organizations that have sponsored events and a few platforms such as Muslims for Black Lives, Muslims for Ferguson, to date, Muslim Arc has been at the forefront of advancing conversations on the movement for Black lives in Muslim American communities. In addition, some members have worked on the ground participating in local actions like Donna and Tariq. So we're also members together, and I actually learned a lot from them as well, so alhamdulillah. We all want, when we see things like this and we see what's going on in the news, we have a choice. We can either decide that, you know, we're going to flip the channel, or we're going to keep scrolling up Facebook or up Twitter and forget about it, or we'll have pause and we'll want to make a difference. Okay, so when we decide we want to make a difference, what's the next thing that we have to decide? Well, how are we going to make that difference? Okay, so that's where Muslim Arc comes in. It is a space, it's an educational organization that provides information and options for Muslims who want to get involved in alleviating people's oppressions on various levels. Okay, so some of the they've had workshops and roundtables like Reclaiming Malcolm X, an online panel, Black Lives Matter at Fresno State Education, Muslims and Black Lives Matter Mosque Cares conventions. They've worked with organizations like ICNA and ISNA and CARE as well. They've had the CARE Youth Activism Workshop, as well as Race Matters at ISNA at a roundtable. So it is an opportunity for us to learn about how we can make a difference and how we can become allies, because that's what happens when people who are oppressed and subjugated, the people that are not at that particular level, they can become allies. And so I would like to focus on that. Primary assertion of Muslim Arc is that anti-racism work is soul work. Anti-racism work is a lifetime commitment to transformative practices that uproot racism. We can look at anti-racism as a way that liberates us from our self-delusions of superiority and inferiority or self-righteousness of knowledge without action. That in interrupting and correcting our harmful actions, anti-racism work allows us to experience Allah's mercy and love for humanity. In addition to a personal and a systemic issue, racism is a spiritual issue. The concept of racism as a spiritual deficiency is shared by theologians of other faiths. More importantly, it's a foundational factor in Iblis's disobedience to Allah. As Muslims, our faith frequently serves as a moral catalyst to not only stand up and resist any personal or familial oppression we face, but to also ally with those facing their own. While this is While this is a noble endeavor, we must be careful that our good intentions come with the necessary skills and approaches to avoid causing further trauma. It is important that we strive to become efficient allies for the pleasure of Allah and not damage lines of mutual solidarity. It is critical that we understand the type of oppression we seek to assist our sisters and brothers in attaining relief from and justice. Not all oppressions are the same. If I'm thirsty, I know what my thirst feels like, and I can understand my thirst, okay? If I see someone drowning, okay, it's not productive for me because I'm thirsty to say, here, you want a glass of water? And they're drowning, As a matter of fact, I actually made things worse. So it's very, very important. We all have noble intentions, but we have to add to those noble intentions, and that's a place where Muslim Arc can serve in helping people do that. Okay, so we're calling for our Muslim brothers and sisters to join us. You can donate to support this important work. You can join Muslim Arc and learn more about uprooting racism. So everyone can pull out their smartphones and go on muslimarc.org/join. It only takes a couple of minutes to join, to learn, to grow, and to have those intentions that you have. You can utilize the information that's at Muslim Arc and the lines of solidarity and the great people that at Muslim Arc to actually put that into action.
Muslim ARC.
No, really, Zeki is a technological genius. I promise. Where is Haroon? Give me the real Muqtazada. Anyway, I have a lot of questions about Muslim Arc, and I hopefully we can revisit some of them when we come back. I'm inclined to take some of those 15 minutes, but I'll keep it moving, and we'll come back to that after Toure, who is a 28-year-old award-winning writer, public speaker, and social justice advocate, born and raised in West Baltimore, Maryland. Whoop, whoop. That's where I'm from as well, and I was actually classmates with his brother, Naeem Muhammad of Native Dean fame. But now Naeem is getting famous because of Tariq, who's just blazing trails. He graduated from Howard University, top 100 ranked Masters of Social Work program concentrating in community administration and policy. Toure serves as the Vice President for MEN, M-E-N, Male Enterprise Network. It's a nonprofit that promotes, advises, and builds relationships with young minority entrepreneurs and professionals. Due to his experience being a former student athlete, football, in 2014 and 2016, Toure organized the first 2 annual professional athlete summits at Douglas High School and Morgan State University, where high school athletes were able to interface and learn about career opportunities off the court as well as on. Touré is the co-founder of the first interfaith rally against hate, which took place on December 19th last year, 2015, in Baltimore in opposition to the hate rhetoric being employed throughout the world. He has been honored with placement on both the HBCU Top 30 Under 30 alumni and the Top 100 Influential Muslims in Social Justice. With a deep passion for the craft of writing, Touré uses prose as a medium for shedding new light on issues such as social inequality, racial inequality, black culture, and black Muslim narratives. In addition, Touré's debut compilation of poetry, Black Seeds, was the #1 selling book in African American literature and poetry in 2016 Black History Month, and ranks in the top 100 bestsellers on Amazon. That's a big deal. We should give him a round of applause. Congratulations for that. In 2016, Black Seeds won Best Poetry Book of Baltimore in Baltimore City Paper magazine. Touré has been featured in Newsweek, ESPN, The Nation, Washington Post, New York Times, and a whole bunch of other newspapers. International hip-hop artist, Black Thought and Realm author, Baltimore author D. Watkins have regarded Touré as the Amiri Baraka of this era. Without further ado, Touré.
So, Safir is not supposed to say that I'm Naeem Muhammad's little brother. I told him earlier today that for 28 years I've been my entire life being introduced as Naeem Muhammad's little brother, alhamdulillah. But he does amazing work, and clearly when you do the type of work that he does and have that type of influence, somebody like me that's been around him all his life is naturally gonna grab from that fruit. So number one, I like to just thank NWMI for having a forum like this on Black Lives Matter and Black Muslims with actual Black Muslims on the panel. In thinking about Imam Hussein, I'm thinking about a statement or a treatise written by a gentleman named Michael Bakunin, I think that's how you pronounce his name, called the Revolutionary Catechism, in which the first tenet, principle he writes in this revolutionary treatise is the revolutionary is a dead man. And I think it's important to frame Imam Hussein as a revolutionary and have our children look up to him as that, because if he was willing to pay the price that so many of our other leaders have paid, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and so many other people, then we have to look at him as that and hopefully one day even aspire to achieve that type of status. So these are really, really trying times for us around the country. And I think it's very important that we recognize that this is just a continuum. In Baltimore, they have an exhibit in the Peel Museum that's about 3-4 miles away from where Freddie Gray's life was taken. And they had these ascending steps, and they have these bulbs lit with a year, and you can look and see 1800 something and then 1900 something. And as you ascend the steps to go to the main exhibit, it actually shows that every time there was a rebellion in Baltimore, it was because of a officer killing a black person. So that was a very interesting exhibit. A friend of mine, Dina Hagag, actually did the initiation of this project. And I think when I say these are important times, there's no better time. Sometimes Imam Suhaib says, dawah moments. These are huge dawah moments. Well, millennials, black millennials, right, and black and brown folk are really, really looking and searching for agency so they can have their own autonomy in what's happening right now. And as Muslims, we have the best thing on the market, Islam. So as far as da'wah, we should be at the forefront. And I want to talk about exactly how we come to the forefront for them Sister Layla mentioned something very important with Muslim Arc and what they're doing. They're providing an avenue and a medium to come to the forefront, but it's important in what that looks like. I had the opportunity to be under the study of Dr. Altaf Hussein, who had a very, very huge impact on how I even look at allyship. So you have to come to the agency of the marginalized, and one, that's the resources. When I was 19 years old, I was writing from my college in Prince George's County to a person that mentored me that was in prison for 4 years. And I was writing to him about recreation centers being shut down by Sheila Dixon, who was the then mayor at that time. And how literally, if you're shutting down 20 plus rec centers, then in the next 5 years, Baltimore is going to be even more buck wild than it already is, right? That's just clear. So as far as resources, right, we have organizations that are right now doing this work that are literally running on fumes, that are $100,000 away from saving, 300, 400 more kids, that are $50,000 away from keeping this kid off the streets. And we have to make sure that they are getting the same type of love, right, through dollars and through whatever, right, that other organizations get. Because if we all came in here and said, look, we're going to raise $500,000 for Gaza, boom, it happens in 4 hours, right? But if we would have said, one time we had an event at the masjid, literally right after the uprising, and only black Muslims came to the masjid. And this was a place where there's multiple different ethnicities there. So we have to make sure that, number one, resources. That's the easiest thing you can do. You got PayPal, you got Venmo, you got, people who come drive to you and get the money. So being able to come to the agency of people who are marginalized like that. The next is platform. The interesting thing about San Bernardino when it happened, I want to say within the next 3 days, you had about 5 or 6 Muslims in good heart and in good spirit go on the Today Show who all will be racialized as brown. And I thought to myself, how clever would it have been if we would have sent 3 white Muslims and 1 black guy, just to throw all the bigots off. And you're like, wow, I'm expecting the people that we're trying to frame in this hatred. So platform, there are people who are connected to journalists, people connected to TV platforms, people who are connected to getting media messages out there. And if we're having people playing the background who really should be telling these narratives, then it actually screws it up for everybody, because once we say, every time one of these things happens, and we put a certain look on TV, or we put a certain narrative in the news, then it actually backs what the type of rhetoric that is already happening. The last is building solidified relationships. Another allusion to things that are happening. I was sitting in Ikna in the back of the room. Imam Suhaib, Imam Mikhail, Ahmed Smith from Annapolis, Imam Abdurrahman Murphy is there, and they're having a panel on social justice and what Muslims can do. I'm minding my business in the back of my family. Imam Abdurrahman Murphy gets up and says, there's no way that y'all gonna have 2 white guys up here talk about social justice without any black folk. So he says, I'm gonna concede my time to Tariq. I'm like, what? I don't have anything prepared or anything like that, right? So to not make the room awkward or anything like that, okay, fine, I'll go up there and I start speaking, and the only thing I had to say, because Ramadan was just about to happen, the only thing I had to say was that, look, for these things to end and for us to collectively work against oppression, we have to have actual, real relationships. And I don't mean just, hey, I'm Facebook's friends with you, liked your point about, that guy who died on TV. I mean real relationships where we spend time together, and that was the character of the Sahaba. They spent real time together as much as possible. So those 3 things, resources, platform, and actually building those relationships, because if you don't genuinely care about me from being in my space, there's no way that I can come to your aid when you really, really need it. And black and brown folks in this country, right, we really, really need it right now. The next part is my actual first interaction with police. I'm gonna speak from a personal standpoint, and how making sure that we have people that are not only in these institutions that can actually help, but that can actually come to the aid. I'm standing outside of a pizza joint in West Baltimore on Walbrook Junction. Brother Safir already knows that's a notorious place, but that's where we go get pizza because we're not going all the way, on the white side of town to go get pizza. And we were standing outside. It was about 5 of us. And a police officer rose up. He said, all of y'all get the F off the corner. So we sitting there almost, you can hear a pin drop, just like right now. And one of my friends who's a bit, he's a 16-year-old, but he presents as a 6'3" grown man. He's like, man, we just waiting for pizza. We not moving. The police officer goes and grabs him immediately and throws him to the ground, and they almost get in a tussle. So he's saying, look, let me up, let me up. All this is going on while the 4 of us are standing around, almost, crowding around him, trying to say, get off of him. The police officer then pushes him off and then goes to go for his gun. And right in that second, a Muslim officer by the name of Brother Robert pulls up and said, look, man, his exact words was, man, they're good kids. You need to leave them alone. And he stopped them from what he was about to do. And the only issue with that is, one, right, nobody should have to be some upstanding citizen not to get shot extrajudicially on the spot. And number 2, you should be able to wait outside a pizza joint or outside a convenience store like Eric Garner or outside another convenience store like Alton Sterling and be able to mind your business. So that's a ground view of what is happening daily in these communities. But also the nature of policing, when you learn that police in the United States are receiving the same training as Israeli police in Palestine. When you learn that and you see those are the intersections, then you understand that, hey, this is just not happening to me. This is happening globally. So when I see a kid laid out in the street in Palestine, I see myself. But the point is to now turn that around. When a kid is laid out in the street like Freddie Gray in Baltimore, do you see yourself? And you ultimately have to. That's what the Muslim has to do in empathy. So the next is about just white supremacy being the top tier and the top branch of this tree. And understanding that Islamophobia is a branch of white supremacy, white hegemony, and racism. Because you don't get to Islamophobia without that, because it is being framed as these brown Muslims are bad, which is why you have Sikh Muslims being attacked, Sikh people being attacked who aren't even Muslim. They just have a turban on. You got idiots attacking them. And you have a whole barrage of that going on in New York and different places in the world. Another part of that, of intersectionality, is that I was speaking just like this in a forum at a masjid. I'm on in the masjid, and I'm done giving my spiel for about 20 minutes about how we need to kumbaya, get together, fight oppression and all that. And the imam raises his hand in the back and he say, brother, we all Muslim. There's no racism in Islam. I said, wow. All right, which angle do I have to hit this with, right? And I say, well, you know what? When I have cousins in Baltimore who are Muslim, when I got family members in Baltimore who are Muslim, and they get an eviction notice or they get a high water bill to move them from out their locale or their actual house, and that's based on zoning and zip codes and how that is toward people of color, and specifically black person, they didn't check to see if they were Muslim. So there are Muslims affected by these things. So we can't just throw that out that, hey, we're all Muslim and then everything's going to be fine. That's that same type of utopia that Brother Safir was talking about as far as all lives matter. That's just not actually the case. When we talk about Ferguson, when we talk about what happened in Ferguson and how the municipality is literally making money off the backs of black people through stopping them and frisking them, from putting fines on them, and knowing that there are Muslims, black Muslims in Ferguson. So we can't jump over that. The next is just simple otherization and double consciousness, which I believe that in South Asian, Middle Eastern Muslims are feeling now, and what W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, having this double consciousness now. As a black person, when you grow up, you not only have to recognize that when a police stops me, that I'm black, but I have to know that he knows that I'm black and he's perceiving me a certain way. So you almost end up insane because you're trying to account for what he's thinking, what I'm thinking, what all the people around me thinking. And if you're being racialized as brown, if you're a brown Muslim, right, and you're walking into an airport, you know what that means now. Because you're watching everything TSA doing and watching everything that TSA is watching you doing, right? You're confused. You're trying to figure out what's going on. So I think even that small, right, experience that we all share now, we should be able to see exactly what's happening in the United States and what's happening around the world. Lastly, Sister Donna alluded to it. The Kerner Commission was put out in the 60s, and it was about all the, they did the whole full thing about all the conditions that black people were living under. 18 to 24 black males have 72% unemployment. That's a still statistic right now in Baltimore today, in Chicago today. In fact, in Chicago, it's in the 80s. About not having housing, about not having so much. We're in D.C. right now in a beautiful restaurant, but this place been gentrified like crazy. So all these, right, conditions are not old. So I think it's very important, lastly, to understand context for Muslims and to not let context be left out of our conversations. I said there should be tons of books on Islam, on the theology of Islam, and Qur'ans and the Masjid, but there should be a Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States so that we understand and we can empathize with what people are going through in this land. And that doesn't make, and what that does, it doesn't make Standing Rock like, oh my God, they're taking land from Native Americans. Of course. Of course. Oh my God, they're killing black people. Of course. That is the context of this land. So hopefully we can get into some dialogue to further that conversation, and that's pretty much just all I have to say.
Okay, well, so we have time. Is it working? We have more time and a few questions only, so get more questions coming. We want to be able to keep the dialogue going. I just want to mention one thing. As we go into the Q&A portion, we should recognize that this panel, who by the way did an outstanding job, let's give them a round of applause at the outset. We should recognize that how the broader United States of America perceives Islam, particularly in inner cities. We should be reminded that when Christians and non-Muslims want their children to be safe in most of the inner cities of the United States of America, they want them to get with the Muslims. This is a fact. This is how Muslims are known in urban America. It's a fact that is underutilized because we Muslims are getting it wrong internally and finding ways not to cooperate. So I really want to, applaud NWMI for putting this panel together, because this is the kind of dialogue that sparks the change. The Quran asks, have we seen the people who lie against the religion? The people who don't interact and engage the orphans or the poor, to feed the poor. And America is poor of knowledge, poor of the right understanding. And we Muslims can't allow the lie of the religion to continue. So we have to feed America in the mind. And this is the sort of panel that gets that done. I'm gonna start asking some questions. This question is, and please send more forward. I got 4 so far, and we want to keep this going. First question. This is for Donna. We have a nationwide epidemic of very segregated masjid communities. This state of affairs creates a barrier to true intercultural understanding and needed allyship for social issues. What specifically can be done to improve this dynamic and create spaces for deeper understanding and respect between members of our respective diverse ummah? Donna, questions for you. Dr. Donna Austin.
So, Bismillah. I think some of it is just basically, there's an internal aspect, right, and then there's an action point, right, or an external action point, I should say. I think that most of us all of us, I think we have to begin to examine our own attitudes and our own opinions, and think about, think about the types of environments that we're in, and the company that we keep, and the things that go on in those. I mean, do we have racist uncles, right, who sit at the dinner table talking about those, Abid, or whatever, and we just kind of think that's okay and normalized and that's fine, and we don't challenge it and we don't feel anything that's wrong with it. Like, we have to begin, I think it begins at home, right? Examining your own attitudes. There's a friend of mine who mentioned, and these types of things are common, they happen all the time, but in the aftermath of the George Zimmerman verdict, he mentioned that he ended up, unfriending. So a black Muslim ended up unfriending a lot of his non-black Muslim friends, because his news feed was filled with, he was asking for it, he was too big, he shouldn't have been walking there. From people who are Muslims. Right? So it's like, I can't even deal with the Muslims because the anti-blackness within my own faith community, right, is a problem. So I think that many of us need to think critically about where we stand, right, and where our practices would place us. If somebody put this out on Front Street, like, would you want to show it? Right. And then beyond that, certainly engaging, right, those close to you. I think, and I'm a history buff, so I always pull these things out. Like, do we know who John Brown was, right? Who knows who John Brown was? Okay, right. So, John Brown is this white man, right, who lost his life in defense of black folks, right? And so and maybe your sacrifice won't have to be that steep, but you need to John Brown your people. You need to be taking on your own, the problems within your own community. And I think the third thing, I would recommend, certainly, like Tariq said, like, developing those relationships. If you are prone to frequent a masjid that is one ethnicity, so, mostly, like, venture out, go over into West Baltimore and visit Masjid al-Safat, right? Go over into these places, right, where you wouldn't normally go. For many years I was also on the board of a mosque in New Jersey, and for most of the history of that mosque, we were a small storefront mosque located in a hood. We were a multicultural community, but we had a lot of problems with Muslims. Well, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go to that. I don't want to go to that space. I don't want to go through that neighborhood. So we'd have to, in order to try and engage, different parts of our community, like, think about dealing with people's attitudes, because they don't want to, And it was interesting to me, like, after 9/11, of course. Just kind of like thinking about what you said, your last point there. That was the one place I wasn't worried. I wasn't worried about nobody coming up here busting the windows in the hood, right? But many of the people that I prayed next to every day felt like the people around them were somehow less than, right? I heard comments after 9/11 from, an elder in the community who I respect, but it was a problem. He's, the way we think about other human beings who don't share our background, talking about those people, and those people. Even if you might make an exception for me because I'm Muslim, maybe, and I pray next to you, maybe, but that's my mother. My mother's a non-Muslim black woman. So, like, if you feel some type of way, you feel these type of people aren't civilized and aren't, whatever. And these are comments that I hear. I've heard these from other Muslims in sacred spaces, right? So, and I think everybody on this panel would have their own set of stories in that vein. We all got these stories, right? So this is not like some isolated incident. So we have to just, introspection and actually willingness to take on ourselves and our communities and stretch ourselves beyond to make relationships where they're not existing.
Excellent. Tariq, Layla?
It's funny you mentioned John Brown. He's a really good example from way back in American history. He wasn't the only abolitionist by far. There were entire states of that promoted the freedom of slaves. They don't tell you that in American history. But the interesting thing about John Brown is that he lived in diverse communities. He lived with black people. So he wasn't just an abolitionist that kind of said, oh, they need to be free, but I just don't want them too close to me. He actually lived, he and his family, his sons, they were raised in diverse communities with black people. And I think one of the things that's been happening for decades with the migration of Muslims into America, which was fabulous and the direct result of the civil rights movements that the very blacks that many Muslims eschew or responsible for, is that where are you living? Think about where you're living, and how it is that you're there and what it is that you're doing there. If you're living, if you and your family are living in an isolated community among whites, then you start to become indoctrinated into the same system that they're indoctrinated into. You're not immune from it. Just because you're Muslim does not mean that you're immune from becoming indoctrinated into a racist system that keeps America the way that it is. So if you isolate yourself from your fellow Muslims of various backgrounds and you put yourself in proximity to whiteness, because hey, there's a lot of privilege there. Okay, but you miss out and you lose out because now these connections can't be made. And then when you turn around and you have a 9/11, or you have a Paris, or you have a Belgium, and the very isolated white communities that you were in now are full of very angry whites. And now you find yourself in a position where you're facing that anger, and you turn to your fellow black and brown Muslims, what do you think we're gonna do? Yeah.
Okay, we're going to keep it moving. I think the questions are coming, and they're getting provocative, and I'm looking forward to the responses. But I want to just mention two things. One, let's try to keep it to 1 minute. All right, and two, I grew up going to IEC. And because of that, I've developed long-term relationships, lifelong relationships with people that were different from my own experience. To the person who asked, what can you do, make a new you, a new me. We can just ponder that one. All right. Next question is, what is an effective but respectful way to confront members of the community who make the ignorant statements such as all lives matter? Second part of that same question, what does John Brown look like in the community? And what would the panelists like to see from their brown allies?
So the first part is,
how do you respond to All Lives Matter?
Oh, okay.
How do you correct it?
I think, the video that we played before, really explains it and puts it in the perfect framework, because we are not living in a utopia. And, you have clearly well done journalism now that shows, specifically when we're talking about police brutality, they have clear, like the Bundy standoff in Oregon, clearly shows that white men can go and take over federal land and chill up there with AR-15s and all type of weaponry.
That's right.
Pointed at the police and the FBI and everybody, and that myself, as a black person, I'm 5'9", the police probably see me as 6'4". If I flinch, you think about that image of having guns pointed at you in that manner, and you think about the report of Darren Wilson when he's on, I think he's on 60 Minutes, and they like zeroing in on his face, and he gets real intimate, and he's like, he's this behemoth guy. He became a monster. and I had to do what I had to do, right? And you got the rest of America, who's mostly white people, tearing up like, oh my God, he had to kill him, he had to. And the issue there is that you have people that are being successfully disarmed. Just in Baltimore recently, in Baltimore County, Corinne Gaines, we just had her vigil, right? Just about a month or two ago, who was literally in her house with a legal gun, right? Having what may be a mental health, breakdown. And the police are adamant about barging into her house and shooting her. And you have white men who have knives, swords, and have committed murders against police being taken in alive. And to know that that's just not a reality, that's what I would tell them. I would tell them, then why didn't Corinne Gaines make it out? Why didn't Alton Sterling make it home to his family if he was unarmed, right? Because if all lives matter, then those things wouldn't happen. If all lives matter, you wouldn't have in Flint the type of lead crisis that they're the type of lead crisis they're going to have 20 years from now. So this isn't about the people that's poisoned right now that's, in their 20s. But in 20 years from now, just like in Baltimore, people say the kids going crazy and all that. In 20 years from now, what Flint is going to experience with the youth, it's going to be something uncharted, as much lead as they're ingesting, because it screws with your emotional control. It screws with your decision-making abilities. But anyway, I went off on a tangent. But that's what you can tell them. Why not Flint? Why not what's going on in Chicago? What they're actually letting happen. They have they just released 10,000. They just released 10,000 point document about Chicago about police torture. If all lives matter, then you don't have that actually happen. What do black people want from, black Muslims want from the brown community? I shudder to speak on that because I don't want to say, hey, I'm going to speak for the entire black nation and tell you what we want. But number one, as we said, if you are in these communities and you are almost never around black Muslims or never there to hear their narratives and stories, hop in your car and drive down to the city and go spend some time. It's very simple.
Donna, Layla. Good coverage. What does John Brown look like for the community? Pass the mic.
John Brown, I think John Brown starts with real empathy, right? Like you really have to be able to see that a threat to your fellow human being is an intolerable situation, and you have to be somebody who, as a Muslim, and this certainly exists in other faith traditions, perhaps worded differently, right? But the sanctity of life, right? The fact that the loss of one human life is as if one has killed the whole humanity. You have to be able to see black people as actual humans, right? And John Brown, I think, did that. He was able to see that black life mattered just as much as his. So, living the Quran, right, taking that seriously, that if black life is threatened by police, by poisoned water, by inadequate nutrition and access to food, by food insecurity. Like, there are people in this country who live with severe food insecurity.
Yeah, but what does he look like today? What does he look like?
The point is that that these issues are issues that actually provoke him into action, right? In whatever way that happens to be, whatever resources that you have at your disposal. Not everybody's going to make the same type of contribution or make the same type of sacrifice. My sacrifice is not going to look like yours necessarily, right? But you have to figure out where it is that you have the ability to make the impact. Is that by you have influence? If you work for a U.S. senator, right, I don't necessarily expect you to be on the protest line in the street, because that might not be where you're most effective. You play golf with this man who makes policy, right? So what are you going to do with the resources that you have at your disposal? So John Brown looks like what your circumstances dictate that you need to do as a human being to intervene in a situation that's intolerable, with whatever resources you have at your disposal.
Okay. So we can move it? Okay, all right. So this next question, I'm going to direct it for you because it's almost like a pleading question. It says, would someone please address the issue of inherent fear that people have for blacks and how this affects authentic relationships between them?
An inherent fear of blacks or an irrational fear of blacks? You can have an inherent fear of something that you know may cause you harm. So my daughters, who are back there, those two cute little ones back there, can't stand spiders. Don't look at a spider. Mommy, there's a spider. You can have an inherent fear of a spider. Why? Because they're most likely, if the spider spook, it's gonna bite you, okay? It's an animal, that's what it does. You can't have an inherent fear of a black person. You can have an irrational fear of a black person because a black person is not just an animal. No matter how hard this society and all of its messaging on the media, interactions, tries to make it seem like it is. So just like when Brother Tariq said that the officer Darren Wilson gave this lame excuse that this person, just because of the being that Allah produced him to be, was there, turned into a monster. Monsters don't exist except in our heads. And so he was able to take the irrational fear that he had and that he knows so many whites in this society have, and he exploited it. So I think the best suggestion I can make about dealing with that inherent fear is, first of all, rethinking what it actually is. Because it isn't inherent, it's irrational. Black people aren't snakes, we're not water, okay? We are human beings and we are all different. And you can't be, the color of our skin does not affect the people that we are, okay? Because if that was the case, then why do I have an inherent fear of white people? Okay? Why do I have an inherent fear of Pakistanis? It's ridiculous. If I said that to you, you would think it was ridiculous. But somehow in this society, it's made it plausible that someone is born with this fear of a skin tone. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, that is an ayat of his. That is a sign of his majesty and his greatness. And we're saying that there is something that is monstrous. I'm sorry, it's utterly ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Okay, moving along. So, next question is directed toward Tariq. But as all the rest, you guys are welcome to chime in. Is Black Lives Matter an organization, a movement, a hashtag? If it's a movement, does it have a set of specific demands, or is it more about awareness? Tariq.
The sisters who were just presenting in that video, they have an organization with a chapter and bylaws and order of operations. And they are a transnational and multinational organization that works on the upliftment of black people. If you go to their website, they have, just like other organizations have like a 10-point plan and outlook, they have the exact same thing. They have a code of conduct, set of values. So that is the actual organization that you could literally call up or email and say, hey, I want to plug in and do some work. Black Lives Matter as a movement, in the same way somebody could say, you know, in the name of Black Power in the 60s and the 70s, I'm going to go out and do this community work, or I'm going to go out and fight against oppression, is the same way people use Black Lives Matter. A movement means that people can work within it in the ways that they see it, you know, fit for themselves. So I can say Black Lives Matter and say, you know what, Black Lives Matter to me so much that, you know what, y'all shut down 50 recreation centers. I'm going to put, money together with people that I know and reopen one for the kids in this particular neighborhood. Black Lives Matter to me so much that, I'm going to go ahead and become a teacher in this, neighborhood where kids have been dispossessed. Black Lives Matter so much to me that I'm going to, go fight for this particular legislation. And those are like the inner workings of that actual platform and how people use Black Lives Matter. The issue comes is that people want to associate the organization with the movement piece. And you have to respect that those three sisters have actually built a organization that has very, very strict codes of conduct, and they move in a very direct and succinct way. And then you shouldn't confuse them at all, because you don't want to muddy some of the work and the relationships that they may be doing. So even myself, when people say, Tariq, are you a part of the Black Lives Matter movement? I shudder to say that because people have framed it as a movement in the organization. I would say, look, I'm a firm supporter of what they're trying to do as far as equality and stopping injustice in the United States. But as far as the organization, I am not a part of a chapter. So if that answers your question, I hope that answers your question.
I'll also say that the Black Lives Matter movement is really an effort that has promoted the swift and transparent legal adjudication and redress of the relationship between the strained relationship between the black community and law enforcement. And because that relationship remains strained, there's not a sufficient disaggregation of the amount of people that are killed, who killed them, what their race was when they got killed, and what was the redress about the killer and what happened as a consequence of that, as well as of our current era, it's probably the preeminent movement of social conscience. And if we relegate it to something that is a black movement, we do such a disservice. It's not a black movement. It's a movement for human beings to become concerned with other human beings. The minute we make it a black movement, you give a pass to all people who are not black, when in fact, as human beings, all of us are obligated to look at this, this horrible injustice that's disproportionately murdering people on a regular basis. And it's because of social media becoming more popular. It's also affecting social media. It's also affecting popular culture. There's a new song, I don't know if anyone's heard it, it's called Need Freedom, where if you watch the Empire series, it's now become a very popular chart topper, tongue twister. Yeah, that is, and I recommend people listen to music. Anyone else on what is Black Lives?
Yeah, so just try to succinctly talk about this. Black Lives Matter has become a social movement, right? And social movements, by definition, have many players. They always have. When we think about the civil rights movement, most of us say Martin Luther King, right? As if Martin Luther King is the civil rights movement, right? But the truth of the matter is that there were many organizations and individuals working in concert, sometimes together, sometimes separately, and sometimes intersecting and coalescing, right? But it wasn't Martin Luther King and SCLC, right? So social movements, by their definition, have become broader than an organization, even if in this particular instance, an organization has lent its name to what we now refer to as a movement. So there are many organizations, some of them that are newer, some of them have, when I was in, and so the day after Darren Wilson was, it was announced that Darren Wilson would not be indicted for killing Michael Brown in Ferguson, I watched that on TV. I went on the internet to figure out where I could be in the street the next day, where the protests were happening. And I'm from New Jersey, and one of the closest protests was in Newark, New Jersey. In Newark, New Jersey, there is not a Black Lives Matter chapter. The people who were there who are organized and have been organizing, and every time something happens, these are the people who have folks' bodies in the streets. You know, the brother that's at the head of that organization has been organizing against police brutality for longer than I've been alive. Okay, so so there are a number of different players that are, and also to address the part of the question about a platform, because I think that was a part of the question. There was recently over the summer the movement for, they call it the Movement for Black Lives, like released a policy platform with recommendations or whatever. This was a coalition of a number of organizations, not just Black Lives Matter, the organization, but also, you know, Dream Defenders is an organization that came into existence after Trayvon Martin, after George Zimmerman was acquitted. You know, there are a number of organizations that came together and agreed upon a list of demands and policy recommendations. You can find this on the internet, right? So this movement is very diverse. You have a whole bunch of different people who are organizing under this now slogan, right, slash, you know, set of, you know, nomenclature or whatever that we have, right, that it's bigger than one organization.
Okay, now I'm going to change the rules again. So we're very, very short on time. We have way more questions than we can get to. So quick, like lightning round almost. I want to make certain that we get to all of the questions, at least the ones that I have in my hand, and I still see other questions getting passed up. Wait a minute. Tanaz, we have it's another question. Okay, so we want to be quick. First question. I'm a high school teacher in a majority-minority school. How do I bring Black Lives Matter into the classroom? Objective recommendations.
You know, there are a number of resources. There are syllabi that have been created that you can find on the internet, Black Lives Matter syllabi that have been created with a ton of resources. You can kind of go through those things and see what would be most appropriate for your particular group of students. You could bring in speakers. I know that there's at least one Black Lives Matter textbook that's been published recently, I think for middle schoolers. You know, so there's a ton of resources that are available. I mean, I would suggest thinking about all of not only the textual resources, right, which you can kind of do a quick Google search and kind of see what resources are out there and sift through them. I mean, I'm a teacher, so I kind of do this type of thing. But also, you know, think about the people in your community that you might invite into your classroom that might be a resource as well.
I have 3 recommendations. Invite them. We're going to go to the next one. Nope. I need to know from you. What are the Black Muslim social service organizations where our dollars will be most fruitful?
Muslimark.org.
That's A-R-C.
A-R-C.
Tariq, also, same question. Specifically was directed to you.
You have MISA in Baltimore, that's Muslim Social Services Association, and they actually work with ICNA Relief. They've worked with Islamic Relief and another, and NWMI. See, look, another plug, NWMI plug. So they actually, you know, they'll take your hard-earned money and manifest that into tangible goods to give to the communities that are affected most by the disenfranchisement and being dispossessed. That's what they do simply, and they do a lot of programming in the city, and they won a lot of different rewards from the city government. And they're continuing, as remember I said about organizations that are running well on fumes. You know, Malcolm X once said, he said, you know, we've done so well with, you know, almost nothing. We might be able to do, you know, everything with nothing, something of that nature. But Muslim Social Services Association, MISA, is one of those orgs that literally is a big grant away from, you know, helping an entire zip code. So you can look them up on the internet. That's misa.org, and probably our NWMI folks here can direct you to them as well.
I would also, everybody here is connected to NWMI. Ask them directly. And Tanaz specifically, so Zaki and company. I mean, these guys they know where the need is and are tied in, because folks are always, you know, approaching any effort that is doing anything for something. And so, you know, the social service organization that is the best bang for the Muslim buck changes, by the season. So if you stay tied into entities, organizations like NWMI, you'll stay current with where the best and highest and best use of the dollars are. Okay, next question is, what have we to say regarding participating in the Black Lives Matter movement as Muslims when there are those of us who don't want to be caught up with the many other groups, including LGBTQ? Okay. So, and I think that's an allusion to Black Lives Matter has been publicly conflated with a very homosexual association. Your response?
So here's the problem. If you are waiting for somebody whose values align perfectly with yours in every single instance before you do anything, then you're just looking for an excuse to do nothing. I can't even sugarcoat that. And the other thing I'll say about that too is that as Muslims, the principles matter even when it's uncomfortable for us to apply them. What do I mean by that? If the Quran says that taking a life is forbidden and that taking a single life is if you have taken the life of the whole humanity, that also includes LGBT people. If you think that innocent people should be able to live their lives free from violence, that means it also applies to people whose lives you may not understand or like. Okay? So this is what it means to be a Muslim. And if we are saying, well, you know what? I'm not really sure about the people whose sexual relations and therefore I'm not going to stand up when somebody tries to harm them. Are you serious? Are you serious? Is this what our morality is? And if that is where our morality stands, then who you have sex with is the least of our worries. The least of them.
If I may add to that, I think also that we are missing one very important thing, and that is the existence of Muslims who want to worship Allah, and they are part of the LGBTQ community. So when you're saying, well, we don't want to align with Black Lives Matter because we're not comfortable with people based on their sexual orientation, that's one of the biggest issues that we have in Muslim communities, is that we want to ignore the fact that that our fellow human beings of various sexual orientations exist, and they want to worship Allah as well, and they also don't want to see people humanity stripped away from them and their lives stripped away from them for any kind, just because of the color of their skin, but also because of their sexual orientation. So I think that Muslims need to kind of wake up to the fact that, you know what, they're gay and transgendered and bisexual and asexual Muslims, and you may be sitting next to one. So let all of that go, and let's work on saving some lives. And also I would like to say that the Black Lives Matter movement, like Donna said, it's a movement, and so there are various parts of that movement, and Muslim Arc is one part of that movement. There's a Black Lives Matter toolkit. It is also information on making that connection between valuing the life of your fellow human being because of the color of their skin, understanding the intersections of race and religion, and also doing it from a Quranic perspective. So if you really like, well, I don't want to join a Black Lives Matter chapter, well, join a Muslim Arc chapter, join Muslim Arc and learn and then do. And if they're working with people, we're not asking you who you sleep with. We got people dying in the streets. We have people dying in the streets. I have a son that is 6'2", and I have to worry about him walking down the street because I don't know what the cops will do to him if they decide, well, you know what, look at that big black dude, okay? So there are bigger problems than me worrying about who you slept with or what you identify as. Let's try to save some lives.
Hold on. No. I got 3 questions. I'm getting the wrap. Got to keep going. You can finish afterwards. You got to respect this, Donna. Please.
No, this is going to take 30
Okay.
seconds. This is going to take 30
Tanaj,
seconds.
you give me the rap and saying let her talk? You can talk.
The last thing that I'll add to that is that we actually expect people to show up for the Muslim community who may not understand us. So if we expect that and we ask people, in spite of their religious orientation or their belief in God or none, to come and stand up for the Muslims, how the hell are we going to turn around? How are we going to turn around? How are we going to turn around and say, well, you know what? I don't like you. I don't agree with you. I don't care who you sleep with. So therefore, I'm not going to stand up for you. That's hypocrisy.
Boy. And it is clear that the conversation around gender, what do you call it? Sexuality, brand new NWMI topic. You need to have a specified session just on that one. It's good, very charged, but I think just I want to get to the last couple of questions. And you're sitting next to me, Layla. Okay. So this question is for Layla. It says, what microaggressions do you routinely see in Muslim institutions?
I'm going to have to narrow that down to 3, okay, because then we'll be here all night.
Perfect, great.
Okay, I think the biggest microaggressions that we see is the isolation of people outside of a specific culture. So if there's a majority culture of Muslims in an institution, it could be a masjid, it could be even social justice organizations. There's a tendency to be a lot of isolation and erasure. So if your community is doing that, you should kind of work towards having more inclusion. Another one is the criminalization of black Muslim boys in religious organizations are a very big problem. Every time something goes down, they look at the black boys first. So the whole criminalization of the black male body, and even the black female body as well, is carried over into the masjid, which again goes into that whole idea of indoctrination. So we need to learn more about that and actually actively retrain our brains to think differently. And I think the last one is the silencing of of Muslims, of minority Muslims, of any ethnic background or race in a particular community, as well as gender. Okay, so I think that we need to work at that as well. So those are the 3. There's more, but I think I'm going to stop at that.
I'm coming to you with one right now. Can someone address the criminal justice system and how its disproportionate weight against black men can be viewed as another form of slavery? Also, discuss the economics of the U.S. prison system. Well, I only said a minute. That was like a thesis. But go ahead, try and condense that as much as you can, Tariq, please.
I just try to handle things on a very, very personal level. If you read in the New Yorker about Khalif Browder, whose mother just passed away from a stressed heart because her child was literally kidnapped years ago off the streets and sent to Central Bookings in Baltimore. We call it Central Bookings. He didn't have a lawyer, a proper lawyer, which most people who are affluent have, to get out of prison or holding that day. So within between 10 to 18 hours, never being involved in the system ever. So that's like you, Brother Akbar, you been in prison before, jail? Never. So tonight you get locked up, they send you out Hagerstown, Maryland, and now you're in what is being crafted as a jungle. And this is what happened to Khalif Browder on Rikers Island. He's a young man, 16 years old, and gets thrown in that environment. and ultimately goes through so much trauma in prison that he comes home and he starts doing okay for a while after beating his charges, but he ends up committing suicide. And to comment on mass incarceration and the money that they're making from it, we have to look at it as a personal level, right? Because literally when I was 14 years old, I would have friends that I would hoop with and chill with that would go disappearing. They'd go disappearing in the summer. And they would come back hardened, cold. And now that I'm older, I understand that these young boys were being picked up off the street and sent off into, Hickey school, sent off into these juvenile detention facilities. And throughout their life, they started to become accustomed to that system. And now going to prison is just fine. So the fact that they're making so much, they're making this profit, they're monopolizing off the bodies of black and brown men. We have to also look at the personal stories of people who are suffering. So the loss of life from Kalief Browder's mother is paramount. We should be talking about that every day because she died from a stressed heart. They took her baby in the middle of the night. Some of us have children here. Imagine your child not coming home and $3,000 being the difference between whether your son spends 400 days. He spent 400 plus days in solitary confinement. Never committed a crime before. So understand that on a personal level before we talk about, we got to stop mass incarceration, because when we just look at the statistics, we just like, man, that's crazy. 40% of 40% of the prison population is black men out of 2 million. That's crazy. And black men are 6% of the of the United States population. No, think about Kalief. Think about Kalief. That makes it intimate. That makes you feel like that could happen to my son. That's what happened to my father. Those are things my father went through when he sent me out into the world and said, I'm going to send you to the store at 8 o'clock at night to go get something, not knowing if I would really make it back, right? Slave catching patrols. So that's what I would say to that. Before we get into the, all into the numbers, because if you don't have an emotional and empathetic connection to it, then you won't do the work. You just be like, wow, that's a big statistic. That's a big statistic, but when you go in your wallet and when you go into those communities to actually do the work, and that comes from getting that empathy because you have a personal connection.
As Tarek was thinking, I'd just like to share this real quick. I thought that how would I condense the contemporary correlation to slavery associated with the criminal justice system in prison? I would do it in the following manner. If for lack of opportunity, a kid gets caught up in the wrong stuff and goes to prison. Prisons are now privatized. So now they have a job in prison making like 60 cents a week or something something ridiculous, to work for Ford Motor Company or one of these, or HP or one of the large corporations. They do their time in prison, and sentencing disparities makes that time longer than their white counterparts for similar crimes. Come out, can't get a job because they have a record, even though they have a record also of experience performing at these companies. So they go back to prison for doing another crime just to try and survive for no opportunity. And they feed back into a form of slavery. Cheap labor to power big companies supporting the prison industrial complex. That is the reality of the cycle that is disproportionately affecting black people, but folks that are caught up on the wrong side of the law. That is the cycle that correlates to slavery. We ought to understand, and the economics of it makes it such that it behooves the criminal justice system and those who are supporters of it to keep the cheap labor flowing and keep sentencing disparities and organize in a way that work for big corporations. So we should know that, and we should fight it in every way possible. It starts with knowledge of it. The last question I have, then I'm going to have a closing statement for each of you. Last question, to get to all of them, is family. It is the biggest struggle. And what, for the person writing this question, what recommendation or suggestion do you have for those of us who are devoted to social justice for minorities especially hashtag Black Lives Matter, but struggle to convey the importance of this to our families, especially Middle Eastern families. And that might be a question that kind of punctuates this whole point, this whole session, this whole interaction. Perhaps along with your closing statement, we'll go down the line. Each person can include that in their closing remarks.
So concluding remarks is just basically, this is not, I just want to reiterate that this is not the time for us to be neutral or to attempt to be neutral, because there really is no such thing, right, in times and circumstances such as these. And so I will borrow a phrase from our American Shaheed Malcolm X, by any means necessary, right? So use whatever resources you have at your disposal to affect change in whatever ways that you can. In terms of your family, those conversations may have to happen one conversation at a time. You might have to be strategic about the battles that you pick and how you choose to fight. But also I think that you know your family better than I do. I know my family. I can tell you what flies with the people that raised me and live with me. But you know your families, and you know your communities, and you know what works. And I'm an anthropologist, so part of my training is actually to be sensitive to particular contexts, right? And I can't come into somebody's context and tell them how to solve their problems, right? You have to figure that out. You have to figure out how to craft messages that that have resonance with the people that are closest to you.
One of the commonalities in the tradition of the prophets, alayhim salam, is that they had to give dawah to people, and ultimately they had to submit when the people didn't listen. Okay, and one of my favorite prophet stories, I love them all, but there's always like kind of a prophet you can connect to, is Musa. I like Musa because he got angry. Like, tired of you, tired of all y'all. I can't take it anymore. Didn't I tell you? Okay, so, and ultimately he did. He had when he came down and he saw what the people were doing after he told them clearly what not to do. Okay, what did he ultimately, after he got mad and grabbed his brother's beard and everything, what did he say? Oh, Lord, protect me and my brother, because the rest of these fools, they out. I can't take it anymore. So sometimes that happens. I have a very diverse family, especially with my husband, and there's Trump supporters in my family. Yeah, there's Trump supporters in my family. There are members of my family that have a Confederate flag. Okay, my relatives. Okay, so you can't change everybody's mind, but you can change your own. And then you can go out and you can speak, and the people that want to listen, the family members that want to listen, they're going to listen. And the family members that don't. You don't want to break down your family and turn it into a shambles because they don't want to get your point. It's okay if they don't get your point, as long as you're doing what you can to help. And if the family members are like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, I want to do that. Or I want to do that, no, you go a little too far, I'll do it up to this. You got to say alhamdulillah and accept it and ultimately submit, because any form of guidance comes from Allah.
I gave a lecture yesterday at Patterson High School in Baltimore called Opportunity Matters. And I contrasted the life between a gentleman named Rich Porter, who was a famous drug dealer in New York, with the life of Steve Jobs, who we know who Steve Jobs is, and how literally Rich Porter sold his first narcotic at 12, internshiped on the streets of Harlem at 12, and how Steve Jobs at the age of 13, he gets an internship in the summer with Hewlett Packard. He calls Bill Hewlett on the phone himself and gets that job. I think that we have to focus on the youth, right? Because adults are hardened people, and sometimes they don't get it. And it's really not our job to constantly knock on the door of these older people who are hardened in their hearts, right? And you know, when Allah says He has put that cement over people's hearts where they can't empathize with another situation, right? But when I talk about opportunity mattering, Muslim Matters, which I'm a journalist for, they gave me the ability, right, to write about how, you know, black communities can benefit from our Southeast Asian and Arab folks who actually have these IT degrees and all this, and you know, these computer engineering degrees. You can come in the hood to these masjids and teach kids how to do that. Now you bring that into your family because you as an adult, right, you say, look, I know my nephew's father, right? I know my nephew's father, he don't get it whatsoever, but you can take your nephew with you to do that while you actually go do that service. And by him seeing that and being around, you know, those people, and being around people who may be at a disadvantage, he'll be able, or she'll be able to understand more of what they have to do. So they actually have to see you doing the work. I mentioned Naeem Muhammad in the beginning, my brother. At 14 years old, I was volunteering with Islamic Relief, so I understood, right, from a very personal level, again, what the work looked like, right, and what the people that needed the work looked like, and some of their stories and stuff like that. So you can immediately tomorrow plug in, like you said, with Muslim Art. Other organizations definitely knew me, and start to serve and take your youth along with you. They need to be, if they above 10 years old, they need to be right by your side watching you serve. And that's going to do more than any speech at the dinner table or anything like that, because they're going to see exactly what it looks like.
As we come to a close, I just want to implore everyone here to really think deeply on Imam Hussein and the power of example for family that he was, to be a small number that would confront a large social injustice. The social justice concern of our era relates to law enforcement, mass incarceration, and the disproportionate death that is occurring within the black community at the hands of law enforcement. It's our obligation to look at our examples and be them in our contemporary lives. If we want to be influencers of our family, I find that if we focus with most emphasis on what we have in common and leave the parts that we have disagreements about until later, whether it's sexual orientation or, you know, prioritizing this over that or whatever it is. And I think that has served not only, you know, me well and those who operate in this space, but it's also served our most glaring historic examples, the ones that we're celebrating right now on the 10th of Muharram. We ought to be thinking about that. So I want to, in closing, I think food is being served right now. It's already been being served a bit, but I want to thank the NWMI and this esteemed panel for their commentary. Why don't you join me in giving them a takbir and a round of applause? Takbir, Allah, takbir, takbir. I want to, Tanaz. Oh, okay. You have a mic? I don't know if it'll reach.
Thank you so much. I'll go back down. I don't want to cover our panelists, and I feel very tall being up here. What a panel. I think, once again, what an evening. Thank you so much. Another round of applause, please. We mentioned two organizations, or our panelists did, and I wanted to just briefly touch on that. One was Muslim Arc, that Layla is a part of. She is leading the workshop tomorrow for the middle schoolers and high schoolers. So NWMI has partnered with Muslim ARC to make sure that we have brought in the appropriate professionals to teach our children regarding anti-racism. The other one that we mentioned was MISA, if I'm pronouncing that properly. NWMI has given our Fitria money to MISA for a few years in order to support the work that they've been doing. So those were our collaborations with both of those organizations. I'd like to thank the volunteers again for allowing us to pull off this evening. It took a lot of work over a long period of time, and alhamdulillah, we're glad that we were able to share it with you. I'd also like to thank our donors. This evening was a challenge because finding space has been a continual challenge for NWMI. And when we said we wanted to have this program, it was very difficult to find space. We found this fantastic space, but it required us as an organization to stretch. And as a result, a generous donor came forward anonymously to help cover the major portion of this event. Alhamdulillah. Thank you. However, we still have not fulfilled the funds in order to cover the costs of this event. We felt very strongly that we wanted to still make sure that it was free and that it was open to anyone who was able to come and join us in this important cause. So I invite you, for those who want to support NWMI in order for us to continue our work, both fighting these issues as well as the other programs that we offer, you can make a contribution in a number of ways. There are these wonderful little black boxes all over the room on different tables. You can also go online, very quickly go online, make an online donation to, again, continue to support not only this program as well as programs in the future. Once again, I thank everybody for coming. Thank you very much for the panelists for honoring us with your presence. Thank you, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.